I had a bad feeling about my own home, a gut instinct honed by 40 years of forensic accounting that screamed. Something was wrong, so I pretended to go on vacation. While I was watching from afar, hidden in the shadows of a neighbor's hedges, an elderly woman took me by the hand and said, "At midnight, you will see and understand everything." When midnight came, I did not just see a betrayal. I saw the utter dismantling of my life. The shock was so visceral, so physically overwhelming, that my heart stuttered in my chest, and I fainted from what I saw. Before I tell you what happened when the clock struck 12, I need you to understand how a man like me, a man who spent his life catching embezzlers and corporate thieves, allowed the biggest fraud of all to happen under his own roof. If you have ever felt like your kindness was being mistaken for weakness, hit that like button and subscribe because this story is for you. My name is Thomas Sterling, and at 71 years old, I thought I had seen every variety of human greed. I spent decades auditing the books of Fortune 500 companies, finding the hidden accounts where executives stashed stolen millions. I could look a man in the eye and tell you if he was cooking the books within 5 minutes. But there is a blind spot that affects even the most seasoned investigators, and that blind spot is the people we raise. My wife Catherine passed away 6 months ago, leaving me in our 4-bedroom colonial in the suburbs of Chicago. It was too much house for one man, but it was filled with 40 years of memories, and I had no intention of leaving. My son Lucas and his wife Megan had other ideas. It started subtly at first with comments about the stairs being dangerous, or the garden being too much work. I ignored them. I am a veteran. I run 3 miles on the treadmill every morning. I am not invalid. But last Tuesday, the dynamic shifted. I was sitting in my leather armchair reading the Wall Street Journal when Lucas and Megan walked in with a bottle of champagne and an envelope. They were smiling, but it wasn't the warm smile of family visiting. It was the tight, rehearsed smile of salespeople closing a deal. Megan was wearing a dress that probably cost more than my first car, and Lucas was fidgeting with his cufflinks, a nervous tic he had developed as a child whenever he was about to lie to me. "Dad, you have been looking so tired lately," Lucas said, pouring the champagne before I could even decline. "We think you need a break. You need to get away from the memories in this house." Megan placed the envelope on the coffee table with a flourish. "We got you a gift, Thomas. A full month at the Palms Resort in Florida. All expenses paid. First-class flight. You leave tomorrow." I looked at the envelope, then at them. Florida. I hate Florida. The humidity wreaks havoc on my joints, and they knew that. Catherine and I had gone once in the 90s and swore never to return. Why would they send me to a place I despised for a month? I picked up the envelope. The tickets were real. First class as promised. But my accountant's brain noticed something immediately. The return date was open-ended, and the resort reservation was under a package deal that was non-refundable. This wasn't a gift. It was an eviction. I looked at Megan. She was checking her watch, her eyes darting to the grandfather clock in the hall. Why was she in such a rush? Why tomorrow? A normal son asks his father if he wants to travel. He doesn't present him with a fait accompli. My heart rate remained steady, but my mind began to race. I looked at Lucas. He was avoiding my gaze, focusing intensely on the bubbles in his glass. "That is very generous of you," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "But who will watch the house? I have the security system, the garden, the mail." Megan answered too quickly. "Oh, don't worry about that, Thomas. Lucas and I will come by every day. We will water the plants, bring in the mail, keep everything perfect for your return. We will even stay here a few nights just to make sure the pipes don't freeze." The pipes don't freeze in September. It was a sloppy lie, the kind that would have gotten a junior executive fired in my old firm. They wanted access. They wanted me gone, and they wanted the keys. I decided right then and there to play the part they expected. They saw an old grieving widower. I would give them one. I forced a tremble into my hand as I reached for the glass. You know, I said, my voice wavering slightly. Maybe you are right. Catherine always loved the ocean. Maybe I should go and say goodbye to her there. The relief on their faces was instantaneous and insulting. They didn't care about my grief. They cared about my absence. Excellent, Dad, Lucas said, clapping his hands together. You pack tonight. I'll drive you to this airport tomorrow morning at 8. I went upstairs and packed a suitcase. I put in the linen shirts they expected me to wear, the sunscreen, the novels. But under the clothes, I packed my binoculars, a high-powered digital camera, and a black windbreaker. I also took my second passport, the one I kept for emergencies from my consulting days in Europe. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the bed I used to share with Catherine and listened to the silence of the house. I had a feeling, a dark, gnawing intuition, that if I got on that plane, I would never step foot in this house again. The next morning, the performance continued. Lucas loaded my bags into his SUV. He was chatting animatedly about how great the weather forecast was, how the resort had a 5-star spa. He was overselling it. When we got to O'Hare, he insisted on walking me to the security checkpoint. He hugged me, a stiff, awkward embrace. I love you, Dad. Call us when you land. Give me the house keys, and I'll head straight over to check the thermostat. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the key ring. I had swapped the house key for the key to the old shed in the backyard hours ago. They looked identical to the untrained eye. Here you go, son, I said, placing the useless piece of metal in his palm. Take care of her things. I promise, he said. He didn't look back as he walked away. He walked fast, pulling his phone out of his pocket the second he was 10 feet away. I turned and entered the security line. But I didn't go to the gate. I went into the restroom, changed my jacket, put on a baseball cap, and used my Irish passport to exit through the international arrivals terminal, blending in with a crowd from a Dublin flight. I walked straight past the taxi stand to the rental car center. I didn't rent a sedan. I rented a white, nondescript cargo van, the kind plumbers or electricians use. I drove it to a Motel 6 3 miles from my neighborhood, a place where no one asks questions if you pay in cash. I waited there until dusk. The hours ticked by, agonizingly slow. I checked my phone. Lucas had texted Hope, the flight is smooth. We are at the house now, everything is fine. Lies. He couldn't be in the house, the key didn't work, unless he broke in, or unless he had a copy I didn't know about. At 7:00 p.m., as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the suburban sky in bruising shades of purple and orange, I drove the van back to my street. I parked 2 blocks away, in a spot that offered a line of sight to my driveway, but was obscured by the large oak trees that lined the avenue. I put on my black windbreaker and grabbed the binoculars. What I saw made my blood run cold. My driveway wasn't empty. Lucas's car was there, but so were 3 other vehicles, large black panel trucks. They weren't moving vans. They didn't have logos. They were backed up right to the garage door, which was open. Men I didn't recognize were carrying crates into my house. Not out. Into. They weren't stealing my furniture. They were bringing something in. I adjusted the focus on the binoculars. The crates were heavy wooden reinforced with metal. It took 2 men to carry each one. They were moving with military precision, silent and fast. This wasn't a robbery. This was an installation. I felt a surge of adrenaline, the same kind I used to feel when I found the smoking gun in a ledger. I needed to get closer. I slipped out of the van and moved through the shadows, cutting through the backyards of my neighbors. The grass was wet with evening dew soaking my sneakers. I kept my profile low, moving from tree trunk to tree trunk, until I was in the heavy bushes separating my property from Mrs. Higgins's yard. Mrs. Higgins was the neighborhood eccentric. 80 years old, she spent her days tending to her prize-winning roses and talking to her cats. Most people ignored her. Lucas called her the crazy cat lady, but I knew she was sharp. Her husband had been in intelligence during the Cold War, and she had lived a life none of us knew the details of. I was parting the branches of the azaleas, trying to get a view of the living room window, when a hand clamped onto my shoulder. I nearly shouted, my heart hammering against my ribs. I spun around, ready to fight. It was Mrs. Higgins. She was wearing a dark raincoat and holding a pair of shears. She didn't look crazy. She looked terrifyingly lucid. "You shouldn't be here, Thomas," she whispered, her voice steel. "But since you are, get inside. Before they see you." She pulled me toward her back door. I resisted for a moment, looking back at my house. A man was standing on my patio lighting a cigarette. He was wearing a shoulder holster. He was armed. I followed Mrs. Higgins into her kitchen. It smelled of lavender and old paper. She locked the door and pulled the curtains tight. "I thought you were in Florida," she said, pouring 2 cups of tea without asking if I wanted one. "I couldn't go," I said, my hands still shaking from the sight of the gunman on my patio. "What is happening, Martha? Who are those men?" She looked at me, her blue eyes clear and sad. "They are the reason Catherine was so worried about you before she died." I froze. "Catherine? What are you talking about?" "Catherine never worried about me. We were happy. Catherine was protecting you, Thomas," Mrs. Higgins said, sitting down opposite me. "She didn't want to break your heart. She knew you were proud of Lucas. She knew you thought he was a successful investment banker." I put the teacup down. "He is a successful banker. He hasn't had a job in 2 years, Thomas." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. "That's impossible. He leaves for the city every morning. He drives a Mercedes. He wears Italian suits. All leased, all debt." Mrs. Higgins leaned forward. "Catherine came to me 3 months before she passed. She had found letters, collection notices. Lucas isn't just unemployed, Thomas. He is a gambler. And not the kind who plays poker with friends on Friday nights. He is in deep with people who don't send letters. He owes millions." I felt the room spin. My son. The boy I taught to ride a bike. The boy I put through college. A gambler. Millions in debt. Catherine paid off one of his debts last year. Mrs. Higgins continued, her voice gentle but relentless. She took $50,000 from her personal inheritance. She made him swear he would stop. But addicts don't stop because they promise. They stop when they hit rock bottom. And Lucas hasn't hit bottom. He's been digging a hole under your feet. I remembered the day Catherine withdrew that money. She told me she was helping a cousin with medical bills. I hadn't questioned her. I trusted her. She had lied to protect me from the shame of our son's failure. "So what are they doing to my house?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Are they selling it?" "Selling it would be too simple," Mrs. Higgins said. She stood up and walked to the window, peering through a crack in the blinds. "Selling a house takes time. It leaves a paper trail. Lucas doesn't have time. The people he owes money to are impatient." She turned back to me. "You asked what they are moving in. They aren't moving furniture in Thomas. They are setting up." Setting up what? Mrs. Higgins checked her watch. It was 9:00 p.m. "You need to be patient. You need to wait. If you go over there now, that man on the porch will shoot you, and they will bury you in the basement and tell the world you went missing in the Everglades. You are officially in Florida, remember. No one is looking for you." The logic was cold and undeniable. I was a ghost. If I died tonight, it would be weeks before anyone realized I wasn't sipping margaritas on a beach. We sat in the dark kitchen for 3 hours. Mrs. Higgins told me things she had seen over the last month. Strange cars parking at all hours. Lucas and Megan arguing in the driveway. Megan crying, screaming that she wasn't going to jail for him. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Because you wouldn't have believed me," she said simply. "You are a man of evidence, Thomas. You needed to see it." At 11:45 p.m., the streetlights seemed to dim. The neighborhood was asleep, but my house was waking up. "Come here," Mrs. Higgins whispered. I stood next to her at the window. Look at the cars. A procession of vehicles was turning onto our quiet cul-de-sac. These weren't the trucks from earlier. These were low, sleek, expensive machines. A matte black Lamborghini, a vintage Rolls-Royce, a Ferrari. They pulled up to the curb silently, their engines purring. Men and women stepped out. They were dressed in evening wear tuxedos, gowns that sparkled in the moonlight. They didn't look like neighbors. They looked like predators. They walked up my driveway, not knocking, just entering as if they owned the place. "What is this?" I asked, my breath fogging the glass. "A party." Mrs. Higgins gripped my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong, the grip of a woman who had held things together through wars. "Wait for the clock to strike 12, she said. "That is when the main event begins." I watched as the windows of my house were blacked out. Heavy curtains were drawn. The house looked dark from the outside, but I could see light bleeding through the edges. They were sealing it off. Suddenly, the front door opened again. Lucas stepped out. He was wearing a tuxedo I had bought him for his wedding. He looked manic, energized, his eyes scanning the street. He waved to a massive SUV that had just pulled up. A man stepped out of the SUV. He was huge, wearing a white suit that looked garish in the suburban night. He walked up to Lucas, and instead of shaking his hand, he slapped my son across the face. I flinched. Lucas didn't fight back. He bowed his head. He ushered the man inside. "Midnight," Mrs. Higgins said. "Here." She handed me a pair of high-powered binoculars better than the ones I had brought. "Look at the living room window. The curtain on the far left is slightly open. I rigged it with a fishing line yesterday when I went over to give them a welcome pie. I pulled it just an inch this evening. I raised the binoculars. I focused on the sliver of glass that wasn't covered by the blackout drapes. The angle was perfect. I could see directly into my living room, my sanctuary, the place where I had spent Christmas mornings. It was gone. The furniture, my furniture, Catherine's antique armchairs, had been pushed against the walls or removed entirely. In the center of the room stood 3 large green felt tables, roulette, blackjack, poker. My living room had been turned into a casino. But it wasn't just gambling. I adjusted the focus. On the mantelpiece where Catherine's urn used to sit, there were stacks of cash, bricks of it. And next to the cash lines of white powder. People were crowded around the tables. The air was thick with smoke. And there, in the middle of it all, was Megan. My daughter-in-law, the woman who taught Sunday school, was wearing a dress that was barely there. She was laughing, throwing her head back, holding a tray of drinks. And around her neck, I gasped, the air leaving my lungs in a painful rush. Around her neck was the diamond and sapphire necklace I had given Catherine for our 40th anniversary. It was the most precious thing I owned. It was supposed to be in the safe deposit box. She was wearing it while serving drinks to gangsters in my living room. "Look closer, Mrs. Higgins commanded. "Look at who is dealing the cards." I moved the binoculars to the blackjack table. The dealer was professional fast. He looked up, smiling at a player. It was Dr. Aris, my personal physician, the man who had prescribed me my heart medication, the man who had told me I was fit to travel but needed to take it easy. He wasn't just a doctor. He was part of it. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The medication, the dizziness I had been feeling for months, the foggy memory. It wasn't age. It wasn't grief. They had been drugging me. They had been keeping me sedated, pliable, preparing me to be shipped off so they could turn my home into a high-stakes underground gambling den. I watched Lucas walk into the frame. He grabbed a handful of cash from the table and shoved it into his pocket. He was laughing high on adrenaline and God knows what else. He pointed to the portrait of me and Catherine that still hung on the wall, and he said something that made the whole room laugh. He mimicked a cane. He mimicked a shaking old man. He was mocking me. He was selling my dignity, my home, and my wife's memory to pay off his gambling debts. The rage was so sudden, so hot, that it felt like an explosion in my chest. My vision blurred. The binoculars slipped from my hands and clattered onto the kitchen floor. "Thomas!" Mrs. Higgins shouted. I couldn't breathe. My left arm went numb. The room tilted. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was the image of Dr. Aris dealing a card, smiling the same smile he gave me when he handed me the pills that were slowly killing me. I fell to the floor, the sound of my own heart deafening in my ears. I had seen too much, and I knew as the blackness swallowed me that if I woke up, I would not be Thomas Sterling, the retired accountant, anymore. I would be something else entirely. I would be their worst nightmare. The smell of ammonia hit me like a physical blow, snapping my head back and forcing air into my lungs. I gasped, my eyes flying open to see the peeling paint of Mrs. Higgins's kitchen ceiling. For a second, just one merciful second, I thought I was back in my bed, that the flight to Florida had been a bad dream, that Catherine was still alive, in the next room. But then the throbbing pain in my left arm returned, and the face of my elderly neighbor came into focus. She was holding a smelling salt capsule under my nose, her expression not one of pity but of military-grade urgency. "Get up, Thomas," she hissed, her voice low and sharp. "You missed the arrival, but the show is just getting started. You cannot afford to be unconscious for this." I struggled to sit up. My chest felt tight, a dull ache that I now recognized wasn't just stress, but the lingering effects of the poison Dr. Aris had been feeding me. But the rage burning in my gut was a powerful antidote. I grabbed the edge of the counter and hoisted myself up. Mrs. Higgins didn't offer a hand. She knew I needed to do this under my own power. She simply pointed back toward the window, where the binoculars sat on the sill, waiting like a judge's gavel. I stumbled back to the glass. My hands were shaking, not from weakness anymore, but from a fury so cold it felt like ice water in my veins. I lifted the binoculars and looked out at the street I had lived on for 40 years. The same parade of supercars had returned, engines idling like big cats. I shifted my gaze to the front door of my house. My home. The place where I had raised a son, where I had held my wife's hand as she took her last breath. It had been transformed into a fortress of vice. Two massive men, clearly professional security, stood guarding the entrance. They were checking names on a list, patting down guests with a familiarity that suggested this wasn't the first time they had done this routine. Lucas was at the door greeting them. My son. The boy who used to cry when he scraped his knee was now shaking hands with men who looked like they dissolved bodies for a living. He looked manic, his eyes wide and glassy, laughing too loud, bowing too low. He looked like a servant who had been given the keys to the castle and was desperate to please the invaders. But it was what was happening inside that truly stopped my heart. Mrs. Higgins had rigged the curtain perfectly. Through that sliver of glass, I had a front-row seat to the desecration of my life. Inside, nothing had changed except for the new medical station by the kitchen where Aris held court. I raised the glasses again. I panned to the right. There in the corner where my favorite reading chair used to sit was a different kind of station. It wasn't for gambling, Dr. Aris was there. He had a black medical bag open on a small table. A line of people was waiting for him. I watched as a young man sweating and shaking sat down in the chair in front of the doctor. Dr. Aris didn't check his pulse. He didn't ask about symptoms. He took a syringe from the bag, filled it with a clear liquid from a vial, and tied a tourniquet around the man's arm. He wasn't just a crooked doctor signing fake prescriptions. He was the house chemist. He was keeping the players high, keeping them awake, keeping them gambling. He was injecting them with God knows what to ensure they emptied their bank accounts before they passed out. And then I realized the true horror of my own condition. The pills he had given me, the ones for my heart. They weren't just sedatives, they were likely test runs. He had been using me as a lab rat, testing dosages, weakening me, making me pliable enough to agree to a vacation, confused enough to sign papers I didn't remember reading. My own home was a laboratory and a slaughterhouse for finances. I watched Lucas run over to the roulette table. He was sweating profusely. He placed a bet, a massive stack of chips. I zoomed in. Those weren't $100 chips. Those were the $5,000 plaques. He was betting $50,000 on a single spin. The wheel spun. The ball clattered. It landed on red. Lucas had bet on black. I saw his face crumble. For a split second, the manic joy vanished, replaced by the hollow, terrifying look of a man who knows he is drowning. He looked around the room, his eyes darting. A large man in a gray suit stepped out of the shadows behind him. He placed a hand on Lucas's shoulder. It wasn't a friendly gesture. He squeezed. I saw Lucas wince, his knees buckling slightly. The man whispered something in Lucas's ear, and my son nodded frantically, pointing towards the stairs, pointing towards my bedroom. They were going upstairs, to the safe, to the place where I kept the bearer bonds, the emergency cash, the deeds. Lucas wasn't running this casino. He was a prisoner in it. He had turned my home into a den of thieves to pay off a debt that was clearly consuming him, and now the sharks were eating him alive in his father's living room. I watched as Megan stumbled over to them. She tried to intervene, placing a hand on the gray-suited man's chest. He brushed her off like a fly. She stumbled back, almost losing her balance, and the man laughed. He said something that made the other men around the table guffaw. Megan's face went red, then pale. She touched the necklace again, as if it were a talisman that could protect her. It couldn't. In this room, she was just another asset to be liquidated. I felt a cold clarity settle over me. The shock was gone. The grief was gone. In their place was the cold, calculating mind of the forensic accountant I used to be. I wasn't looking at my family anymore. I was looking at a crime scene. I was looking at liabilities. I was looking at targets. They thought I was a senile old man rotting on a beach in Florida. They thought they had won. They thought the house was theirs. I lowered the binoculars and turned to Mrs. Higgins. "I need a phone," I said. "Not mine. A burner." She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a cheap, prepaid flip phone. She had been prepared. She handed it to me. "Who are you calling?" she asked. "The police know," I said, staring at the lit windows of my home, watching the shadows of the monsters dancing on my walls. "The police are for criminals. These people are worse than criminals. They are traitors. And if I call the police now, Lucas will claim coercion. He will lawyer up. The evidence will disappear. The money will vanish." I opened the phone. I knew the number by heart. It was a number I hadn't dialed in 10 years, a number belonging to a man named Kowalski, a private detective who used to be the best dirty cop hunter in Chicago before he went private. "I am not calling the police," I repeated. "I am calling in a cleanup crew. But first, I need to secure the assets." I looked back at the window one last time. Lucas was handing the gray-suited man a stack of papers. "My papers. Enjoy it while it lasts, son," I whispered to the glass. "Because midnight has come and gone, and you have no idea what is waking up in the dark." I dialed the number. It rang once. "Kowalski," I said. "It's Sterling. I have a job. And bring the heavy equipment." I sat down at Mrs. Higgins's kitchen table and began to write. I didn't write a letter. I wrote a ledger. I started listing every face I had seen, every crime I had witnessed, every asset they were stealing. I was building a case brick by brick, and when I was done, I wasn't going to just send them to jail. I was going to leave them with nothing. The night was still young, and the nightmare for them was just beginning. I gripped the windowsill so hard, my knuckles turned white, the pain in my chest growing from a dull ache to a sharp, rhythmic stabbing. I thought I had seen the worst of it. I thought seeing Megan wearing Catherine's necklace was the ceiling of my tolerance. I was wrong. The binoculars were heavy in my hands, but I could not put them down. I watched as Lucas led the large man in the gray suit away from the noise of the casino floor and toward the heavy oak doors of my study. That room was my sanctuary. It was where I had spent 40 years decoding ledgers, finding the truth hidden in columns of numbers. It was lined with books Catherine had bought me, first editions of history and philosophy. It was where I sat when I needed to think, where the air always smelled of old paper and lemon polish. It was the one place in the house that was strictly mine. Lucas kicked the door open. He didn't turn the handle. He kicked it. The lack of respect was so casual it felt like a physical slap. Through the lens I saw them enter. The room had been stripped. My mahogany desk, a gift from my partners when I made senior auditor, was still there, but everything on it was gone. My pictures of Catherine, my fountain pens, my framed CPA certification, all gone. In their place were digital scales, professional-grade counting machines, and stacks of vacuum-sealed bags filled with white crystals. They weren't just gambling. They were using my home as a distribution hub. Lucas walked around the desk and sat in my chair. He spun it around, putting his feet up on the leather surface, feet clad in shoes I had paid for. He picked up one of the bags and tossed it to the gray-suited man. Then he stood up, spreading his arms wide as if he were embracing the room, embracing the filth he had brought into our lives. I saw his lips move. I didn't need to be a lip reader to understand the arrogance. But Mrs. Higgins, standing beside me like a ghost, whispered the translation, as if she were reading subtitles. He is saying the old man is gone. This house is ours now. It is a gold mine. A gold mine. He wasn't talking about the property value. He was talking about the volume of narcotics moving across the desk where I used to pay his tuition bills. He was talking about the exploitation of my legacy. He was celebrating my erasure. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal severed something vital inside me. It wasn't a metaphorical heartbreak. It was a physiological failure. The tightening in my chest snapped. A crushing weight like an anvil dropped directly onto my sternum. My left arm didn't just go numb. It felt like it had been set on fire. The air in Mrs. Higgins's kitchen suddenly became too thin to breathe. I tried to speak. I tried to say his name. Lucas. But all that came out was a strangled gasp. The room tilted violently to the right. The floor rushed up to meet me. The last thing I saw was the light from my own study window, a beacon of corruption in the darkness before my vision tunneled into black, and I hit the linoleum with a thud that shook the walls. Darkness. Then a sharp stinging sensation on my cheek. Voices. Distant, then close. Stay with me. Don't you dare die on me, Thomas. It was Mrs. Higgins. Her voice wasn't the wavering tone of an old woman. It was the command of someone who had triaged soldiers. I felt pressure on my chest. Rhythm 1, 2, 3, 4. She was performing CPR. No, she was checking my pulse, pressing hard on pressure points. I gasped, sucking in air that tasted of dust and fear. My eyes snapped open. I was on the floor. Mrs. Higgins was hovering over me, her face inches from mine. She had a stethoscope. Where did she get a stethoscope pressed to my chest? Rate is erratic but stabilizing, she muttered to herself. She pulled back, looking at me with eyes that held no panic, only calculation. You had an angina attack. Severe. Likely stress-induced combined with withdrawal. Withdrawal, I croaked, trying to sit up. The room spun, then settled. From the medication, she said, helping me prop myself up against the cabinets. The poison Eris has been feeding you. Your body is in shock. You stopped taking it this morning, and now the stress is triggering a rebound effect. She handed me a glass of water and 2 white pills. Aspirin. Chew them. It will thin the blood. I chewed the bitter tablets, my mind racing faster than my heart. I needed to call the police. I needed an ambulance. I needed to end this. I reached for the burner phone on the table. "Don't," Mrs. Higgins said, placing her hand over mine. "They are selling drugs in my study," Martha, I rasped. "My son is a criminal. I am having a heart attack. Call 911. If you call 911, the ambulance comes to this house. The police come to this house. And do you know what happens? Lucas sees you. He sees you are alive. He tells the police you are senile, that you wandered off, that you are confused. He has the paperwork, Thomas. He has the medical power of attorney you signed 3 months ago when you thought you were just updating your will." I froze. I remembered signing a stack of documents. Lucas had said they were standard estate planning forms. "He owns you right now," she continued. "If the police come, they hand you back to him. And Dr. Aris will sedate you so heavily you won't wake up until you are in a facility with barred windows, and by then the house will be sold and the money will be in the Cayman Islands." She was right. The logic was cold, hard, and undeniable. I couldn't use the system because they had weaponized the system against me. I struggled to my feet, using the counter for support. The pain was still there, a dull roar in the background, but the aspirin was working, or perhaps it was just the adrenaline of survival. I needed to see. I needed to know the full extent of the enemy's resources. I went back to the window. I picked up the binoculars. The scene in the study had calmed down. Lucas was drinking scotch, laughing with the gray-suited man. But my eyes drifted. I scanned the rest of the house. I looked for the weak link, and then I found him. I shifted my gaze back to the living room, past the roulette wheel, past Megan and her stolen necklace. I looked at the corner where Dr. Aris had set up his station. I thought he was just there to keep the high rollers awake. I was wrong. Through the magnified lenses, I saw Dr. Aris open a silver case. It wasn't a standard medical kit. It was lined with velvet. He took out a vial of clear liquid and a fresh syringe. A young man, looking pale and shaky, sat in the chair before him. He wasn't a gambler. He looked like an addict. He handed Dr. Aris a stack of chips, casino chips. Aris pocketed the chips. He didn't log them. He didn't put them in the house bank. He put them in his own pocket. Then he leaned in. He didn't inject the man in the arm. He injected him in the neck. I zoomed in. The man's head lolled back, his eyes rolling up. A look of pure chemical bliss washed over him. Aris smiled. It was a smile I recognized. It was the same benevolent, reassuring smile he gave me every time he handed me a prescription bottle and told me, "This will help you sleep, Thomas. This will help you forget." He wasn't just a doctor on the payroll. He was a dealer. He was using his medical license to procure high-grade pharmaceuticals and selling them to Lucas's clientele for gambling chips. He was skimming off the top. And that was when I realized the true nature of my illness. The memory loss, the tremors, the sudden fatigue. He hadn't just been sedating me. He had been addicting me. He had been giving me small controlled doses of something highly addictive, something that made me dependent on him, on his checkups, on his refills. He was grooming me to be the perfect patient, compliant, confused, and completely under his control. The realization didn't make me faint this time. It made me focused. It sharpened my vision. The pain in my chest receded, replaced by a cold, hard knot of determination. They thought I was a victim. They thought I was a feeble old man whose heart was giving out. I lowered the binoculars. I turned to Mrs. Higgins. "You said Aris gave me these pills to weaken me," I said, my voice steady for the first time that night. "Yes," she replied. "And you used to be a nurse in the military." "Correct." "Can you tell me exactly what he has been giving me if I show you the bottle?" I still had the bottle in my jacket pocket. "The one I was supposed to take on the plane." She nodded. "I can." I handed her the orange plastic vial. She popped the cap. She poured a few pills onto the table. She didn't just look at them. She crushed one with the back of a spoon, smelled it, tasted a tiny particle on the tip of her finger. It's not heart medication, Thomas, she said, her face grim. It's a cocktail. Benzodiazepines for the memory loss. And a low dose of arsenic. Arsenic. He wasn't just committing me. He was killing me. Slowly, making it look like a natural decline. If I had gone to Florida, I would have died in that hotel room within a week from withdrawal or organ failure, and they would have cremated me before anyone asked for an autopsy. I looked back at the window at the man in the white coat who had sworn an oath to do no harm. I wasn't going to play by their rules. I looked at Mrs. Higgins. I need to get into that house. Not now, but soon. I need to get into my study. Why, she asked. Because Lucas thinks he wiped my computer, I said. But I taught him how to use a computer, and I know he is lazy. He didn't wipe the hard drive. He just deleted the shortcuts. The evidence of where the money is going, who he owes, and where Aris is stashing his skimming, it's all on that machine. I picked up the burner phone again. I looked at the time. It was M. I dialed Kowalski. Wake up, I said when he answered. The job has changed. I don't just need a cleanup crew. I need an extraction team. And bring a toxicologist. I have a sample that needs to be verified. I hung up and sat down at the table watching the lights of my own personal hell flicker across the street. My heart was still beating, damaged but functional. And as long as it was beating, they were not safe. The old man they knew was dead. He died on this kitchen floor. The man who got up was the man who used to hunt embezzlers in the jungles of corporate finance. And the hunt was on. The realization that the man responsible for my health was the architect of my decline did not hit me like a fever. It hit me like a freeze. I sat in Mrs. Higgins's kitchen, the hum of her vintage refrigerator, the only sound in the room, staring at the orange plastic vial on the Formica table. My name was printed on it. Thomas Sterling, 1 tablet daily, for heart health. It was a lie printed on a pharmacy label, a death sentence disguised as a prescription. Mrs. Higgins moved with the efficiency of the field nurse she once was. She didn't offer me tea or sympathy. She offered me facts. She took a mortar and pestle from her cabinet, crushed another one of the pills into a fine white powder, and performed a simple chemical test using a solution she kept under the sink, a remnant, she said, of her husband's darkroom photography days. The liquid turned a muddy, sickly brown. I looked at my hands. They were trembling. For 2 years I had looked at these hands and felt shame. I thought it was Parkinson's. I thought it was age catching up to me. I had stopped building model ships, a hobby I had loved since I was a boy, because I couldn't hold the tweezers steady. I had stopped writing letters to my old friends because my handwriting had become a jagged, illegible scrawl. It wasn't age. It was them. They stole my hobbies. They stole my confidence. They stole the last good years I had left. I thought back to the moments that had defined my life since Catherine died. The times I had forgotten where I parked the car. The time I left the stove burner on. Lucas had been there, shaking his head, looking at me with that pitying, condescending smile. Dad. You're getting worse, he would say. Maybe you shouldn't drive anymore. Maybe we should take the keys. I had believed him. I had handed over my car keys voluntarily, thinking I was a danger to society. But now, looking at that powder on the table, the memory shifted. I hadn't left the stove on. I was meticulous. Lucas had come over for dinner that night. He had gone into the kitchen to get a glass of water. He had turned the knob. He had staged my senility to gaslight me into submission. Why, I asked, my voice raspy. Why not just kill me if they wanted the money? A heart attack is cleaner. A flight of stairs is faster. Why do this? Why spend 2 years turning me into a vegetable? Mrs. Higgins sat down across from me. Because a dead man leaves a will, Thomas. And wills can be contested. Wills go through probate. Wills take months, sometimes years, to settle, especially with an estate as large as yours. Creditors don't wait for probate. The people Lucas owes money to those men across the street with the shoulder holsters, they want their cash now. She pointed a knobby finger at the vial. They didn't want a corpse. They wanted a conservatorship. The word hung in the air, heavy and legalistic. Conservatorship. I knew it well. I had audited companies where CEOs were removed under similar clauses. It was the ultimate coup. If they could prove I was mentally incompetent, unable to care for myself or my finances, they could petition the court to take control of my entire life. They wouldn't just inherit my money after I died. They would get to spend it while I was still alive. They would have the legal power to sell my house, liquidate my stocks, and drain my offshore accounts, all under the guise of managing my care. And I would be locked away in some budget facility, sedated out of my mind, watching the clock on the wall until my heart finally gave out, while they lived like kings on the fortune I built. It was a fate worse than murder. It was a living erasure. I stood up. The dizziness was still there, but the aspirin Mrs. Higgins had given me was thinning the blood, and the rage was pumping it faster. I walked to the sink and splashed cold water on my face. I looked into the small mirror hanging above the basin. The man looking back was pale. His eyes were sunken. He looked like a victim. I bared my teeth. No, not a victim. A sleeper agent who had just been activated. I need to hear them say it, I said, drying my face with a rough towel. I know what the pills are. I see what is happening in my house, but I need to hear the plan. I need to know exactly how much time I have before they file the papers. Mrs. Higgins reached into a drawer and pulled out a small black receiver. It looked like a police scanner. I told you I rigged the curtain, she said. I also left a housewarming gift on the kitchen counter yesterday. A nice potted orchid. I looked at her. You bugged the plant. She smiled a thin, dangerous smile. The microphone is in the soil. It captures everything in the kitchen and the living room. It's not high fidelity, but it works. She turned a dial. Static filled the kitchen, followed by the sound of clinking glasses and loud laughter. The party across the street was in full swing. Filter it, I said. Isolate the voices near the kitchen island. That is where they congregate. That is where they plan. She adjusted the frequency. The background noise of the roulette wheel faded. Voices came into focus. I heard the clack of heels on tile. Megan. Then a heavy sigh. Lucas. How much did we clear in the first hour? Megan asked. Her voice wasn't slurred anymore. It was sharp, greedy. Lucas sounded breathless. 200,000 on the tables. Another 50 from the pharmacy cuts. Eris is moving product fast. Good, Megan said. That covers the interest payment for this month. But we need the principal, Lucas. We need the big money. When does the old man come back? He doesn't, Lucas said. His voice dropped lower, but the microphone picked it up clearly. I spoke to Eris. He upped the dosage in the travel bottle. By the time he lands in Florida, he won't know his own name. He'll wander off. The police will pick him up. They'll run his ID, see the medical alert we filed yesterday. You filed it? Megan asked. Done. Lucas laughed, the sound of ice hitting glass. I told the precinct he has advanced dementia. I told them he gets aggressive. So when they find him, they won't listen to a word he says. They'll sedate him and call me. And I will fly down playing the heartbroken son, and I will sign the papers to have him transferred to the Shady Acres facility in Tampa. Shady Acres. It sounded like a place where people went to rot. And the house, Megan asked. The house is already listed on the dark market, Lucas said. I have a buyer for the deed. Once I have the conservatorship, I can sign the transfer. We sell it with the contents. We walk away with $3 million clean plus whatever we make tonight. And the necklace, Megan asked, her voice dropping to a purr. Can I keep the necklace? Keep it, Lucas said. He won't remember he ever bought it. He won't remember her. The static returned as they walked away. I stood in the center of Mrs. Higgins's kitchen, my hands clenched into fists so tight, my fingernails cut into my palms. They weren't just killing me. They were banking on my memory, failing so completely that I would forget Catherine. They were counting on erasing the love of my life from my mind so they could wear her jewelry. That was the mistake. That was the variable they hadn't accounted for. My memory was the one thing the drugs hadn't fully taken. I remembered everything. I remembered the day I met Catherine. I remembered the day Lucas was born. I remembered the look on his face when he caught his first fish. And I remembered the exact code to the encrypted server where I kept the files that could burn this entire city to the ground. I turned to Mrs. Higgins. "Do you have a computer?" I asked. "A secure one." She nodded toward the back room. "My husband's old rig. It's air-gapped. No internet connection unless you plug it in." "Perfect," I said. I walked into the back room. It was dusty, filled with boxes of files. I sat down at the computer. It was old, but it would work. I didn't need it to hack the Pentagon. I needed it to write a death warrant. I took the burner phone and tethered it to the computer. I needed a connection just for a few minutes. I logged into a cloud server that didn't officially exist. It was a server I used during my days investigating money laundering for the state. It had tools. It had access. I wasn't Thomas Sterling, the retired father, anymore. I was Sterling, the auditor. And I was about to conduct the most aggressive audit of my career. First, I pulled Lucas's credit report. It was a sea of red. Defaulted loans, maxed out cards. But then I dug deeper. I used the software to trace his digital footprint. I found the online gambling accounts. Offshore. Unregulated. He had lost $4 million in 3 years. He hadn't just lost it. He had stolen it from clients at his old firm before they fired him. That was why he was unemployed. He wasn't laid off. He was fired for cause, and they had hushed it up to avoid a scandal. He was a felon who hadn't been caught yet. Then I looked at Megan. I traced her spending. The necklace wasn't the only thing she had taken. She had opened credit cards in my name. Identity theft. She had drained my emergency savings account, the one I kept for medical bills 2 weeks ago. $50,000. Gone. Spent on designer clothes and a deposit for a luxury condo in Miami. They were planning to leave me to rot while they lived on the beach. And finally, Dr. Aris. I ran his medical license. It was clean on the surface. But when I cross-referenced his name with the DEA databases, I still had backdoor access to flags popped up. He was under surveillance. He was suspected of running a pill mill distributing opioids to addicts. He was sloppy. He was desperate. I had them. I had the motive. I had the means. And thanks to Mrs. Higgins's orchid, I had the confession. But knowledge wasn't enough. I needed leverage. I needed to put them in a position where they would destroy each other. I disconnected the internet. I sat back in the creaky chair and closed my eyes. I visualized the chessboard. Lucas needed money to pay the gray-suited man. The gray-suited man needed the house to launder his drug money. Megan needed to escape. Dr. Aris needed to not go to federal prison. I could use that. I opened a new document. I began to draft a legal instrument. It wasn't a will. It was a trust. A revocable living trust. I dated it 3 months prior, back when my handwriting was still steady, back before the arsenic took hold. I knew how to forge my own signature from my prime years. I transferred the title of my house, my investment accounts, and my entire estate into this trust. And I named a sole beneficiary, not Lucas. The Catherine Sterling Shelter for Battered Women. A charity that didn't exist yet, but would as soon as I filed the paperwork. But I didn't file it yet. A trap needs bait. I picked up the burner phone. It was time to introduce a new player to the game. I dialed the number of the only lawyer I trusted. Harrington. He was expensive. He was ruthless, and he hated Lucas because Lucas had once stiffed him on a consultation fee. Harrington, I said when he answered. Don't hang up. It's Sterling. I'm not dead, but I need you to help me play a ghost. I explained the plan. I told him about the house, the casino, the drugs. I told him I needed him to set up a shell company, a company that looked like it was owned by a Saudi prince or a Russian oligarch, a company with unlimited funds and a desire to buy real estate in the suburbs for private storage. We are going to make Lucas an offer, I said, my voice cold. We are going to offer him $10 million for the house. Cash. Fast close. 10 million, Harrington asked. The house is worth 2. Exactly, I said. Lucas is greedy. He is desperate. If he sees 10 million, he won't ask questions. He won't check the deed. He will sell a house he doesn't technically own yet to a buyer who doesn't exist for money he will never see. And when he signs that contract, Harrington said, catching on when he accepts the deposit, he commits fraud. I finished. Wire fraud, real estate fraud. And since he owes the mob 5 million, when he tells them he has a buyer for 10, they will let him live for another 48 hours. They will wait for the money. And when the money doesn't come, Harrington asked, then the sharks eat the other sharks, I said. I hung up. I walked back into the kitchen. Mrs. Higgins was making a sandwich. You look better, she said. I feel better, I replied. I looked out the window at my house. The party was raging. I saw shadows dancing on the ceiling. They were celebrating my demise. They were drinking my wine and spending my legacy. Let them dance, I thought. I turned to Mrs. Higgins. I need one more favor, Martha. I need you to go over there tomorrow morning. To the Lion's Den, she asked, raising an eyebrow. Yes. I need you to deliver a package, a welcome gift for the new owners. What is in the package? I reached into my pocket and pulled out the photograph I had carried in my wallet for 40 years. It was a picture of me in my uniform, holding an M16 rifle in the jungles of Vietnam. I looked dangerous. I looked lethal. And on the back of the photo, I wrote a single line in block letters, keeping my hand steady by sheer force of will. I know what you did last summer, and I know what you are doing tonight. Put this in an envelope, I said, and address it to Megan. Not Lucas, Megan. Why Megan? Because Lucas is arrogant, I said. He thinks he is untouchable. But Megan is scared. I saw her face when that mobster touched her. She is terrified. If we squeeze her, she will crack. And when she cracks, she will turn on him. I watched Mrs. Higgins seal the envelope. The first grenade had been primed. I walked back to the back room and lay down on the cot Mrs. Higgins had set up. I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and listened to the beat of my heart. It was slow, steady, rhythmic. The arsenic was leaving my system. The fog was lifting. I was Thomas Sterling. I was 71 years old. I had a bad heart and a broken family. But as I closed my eyes, I made a promise to the ghost of my wife. I will not just survive this, Catherine. I will clean house. And when I am done, the only thing left standing will be the truth. The counterattack had begun. And tomorrow, the psychological warfare would start. They wanted to drive me crazy. I was about to show them the true definition of madness. I did not stay in Mrs. Higgins's back room. It was too close to the crime scene, too close to the memories that threatened to break my concentration. I needed distance and I needed a vantage point. So 2 days after my funeral, the one my son believed was inevitable, I moved into a studio apartment on the 4th floor of a brick walk-up in the city. It was a dingy place with peeling wallpaper and a radiator that hissed like a dying snake, but it had one feature that was worth $1 million. Its single grime-streaked window looked directly across the street into the glass-walled office of Sterling & Partners, the investment firm where my son claimed to work. He didn't work there anymore, of course. I knew that now. But he still maintained a consulting office on the 12th floor, a vanity address he paid for with stolen money to keep up appearances. I set up my command center on a folding card table. I had the air-gapped laptop Mrs. Higgins had lent me now connected to a high-speed encrypted dongle Kowalski had provided. I had a pot of black coffee, a bottle of aspirin for the lingering tremors in my hands, and a stack of yellow legal pads. I was back in my element. I wasn't a father grieving a betrayal. I was a forensic auditor conducting an autopsy on a living subject. The first step was access. Lucas thought he was smart. He thought he had scrubbed his digital footprint. But Lucas was lazy. He used the same password for everything. I knew it because I had set up his first email account when he was 12. It was the date of his adoption, the day I brought him home and promised to protect him. The irony was a bitter pill I swallowed with my black coffee. I logged into his cloud storage. It took 3 tries to bypass the 2-factor authentication, which I routed to the burner phone I had cloned from his old SIM card, a trick Kowalski taught me. When the green access granted bar flashed across the screen, I didn't feel triumph. I felt nausea. What I found wasn't just financial irresponsibility. It was a catastrophe. I opened a folder labeled simply Portfolio. Inside, there were no stocks, no bonds, no legitimate investments. There were spreadsheets tracking sports bets, massive ones. 50,000 on a boxing match. 100,000 on a horse race in Dubai. The columns were a sea of red ink. He wasn't just losing, he was hemorrhaging. But where was the money coming from? I traced the deposits. They were structured transfers. $9,000 here, $9,000 there, just under the $10,000 reporting threshold that triggers an automatic flag to the IRS. It was classic laundering. And the source accounts, they were mine. He had been siphoning money from my retirement fund for 3 years. He had forged my digital signature. He had created fake email addresses to intercept the bank alerts. He had stolen nearly $800,000 before the night of the casino party. But that was just the appetizer. The main course was in a subfolder buried deep in the drive, protected by a second password. I guessed it on the first try, Megan. Inside was a PDF document. It was a promissory note. Not from a bank. From a Vargas Holdings LLC. I ran the name through my old databases. Vargas Holdings was a shell company for the cartel. They didn't give loans. They gave death sentences. I read the terms. Principal $5 million. Interest rate 10%. Weekly. And the collateral, I zoomed in on the attachment. It was a photo of my house, my colonial with the white shutters, the house where Catherine had planted her hydrangeas. There was a lien document attached unsigned but ready. It listed the property as the primary asset securing the loan. He had leveraged my home, my sanctuary, against a debt to the mob. He hadn't just sold the furniture. He had sold the ground beneath my feet. I looked up from the screen and across the street. I could see him. Lucas was pacing in his office. He was on the phone, gesturing wildly. He looked thin, haggard. He wasn't the confident host of the casino night anymore. He was a rat in a cage. I watched him slam the phone down. He ran his hands through his hair. He went to a safe in the corner of his office, opened it, and stared inside. Then he slammed it shut. It was empty. He was broke. The casino night hadn't covered the interest. The sharks were circling. My phone rang. It was the burner phone, the one Lucas thought was my main line. I stared at it. The screen flashed Lucas. This was it. The performance. I took a deep breath. I opened a soundboard app on the laptop, another tool Kowalski had installed. I selected Miami Beach Ambience. The soft sound of crashing waves and distant seagulls filled the small apartment. I cleared my throat, pitching my voice higher, adding a tremor to it. I answered. "Hello, Lucas, is that you?" "Dad?" Lucas's voice was tight, high-pitched. "Where have you been? I've been calling for 2 days." I held the phone away from my ear slightly, as if I were struggling to hear. "I'm sorry, son. The reception here. The ocean is so loud. I'm at the resort. The Palms. It's beautiful." "You're at the Palms?" Lucas sounded relieved but suspicious. "Why didn't you call when you landed?" I forgot, I said, letting the dementia seep into my tone. "I got confused at the airport. A nice young man helped me. I think I took a nap." "What day is it?" "It's Thursday, Dad." "Jesus, listen to me. Focus." I heard the sound of paper rustling on his end. "Did you sign the papers?" "The envelope I put in your carry-on." I paused. I pretended to think. "Papers, the power of attorney, Dad." He shouted it. I watched him across the street. He was gripping the phone so hard, his knuckles were white. He was sweating. "The power of attorney so I can handle the bills while you are gone. You said you would sign it and mail it back the moment you landed." "Oh, yes, the papers." I looked at the blank legal pad in front of me. "I signed them, Lucas. I remember now. I signed them yesterday." "Or was it today? Did you mail them?" "This is important, Dad. Did you put them in the mailbox? I think so," I said, my voice drifting. "I gave them to the concierge, a nice man with a mustache. He said he would take care of it." "Which concierge? What was his name? I don't know." "Lucas, I'm tired. The sun is very hot. I want to go lie down." "No, don't lie down. Dad, listen to me." I checked the tracking. The envelope hasn't been scanned. "Are you sure you gave it to him?" "I'm sure. Pretty sure." "Why are you shouting, son? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong. He was lying. Everything was wrong. Without that paper, he couldn't sell the house legally. He couldn't transfer the deed to Vargas. He was stalling the mob with a promise he couldn't keep. I need to pay the gardener. I need access to the checking account." "The gardener. He needed $5 million and he was talking about the gardener. I'll check with the desk later," I said. "But Lucas, I found something strange in my suitcase." "What?" His voice snapped with tension. "A bottle of pills. But they aren't mine. They are blue. Mine are white." "Did Dr. Aris give me new pills?" I watched him freeze across the street. He stopped pacing. "Yes," he said slowly. "Those are new vitamins. For your memory. Take them, Dad. Take 2 right now. They will help you relax." He was trying to overdose me remotely. He wanted me unconscious or dead before I could ask any more questions. "Okay, son," I said. "I'll take them. I love you. Just find the papers, Dad." He hung up. I killed the ocean sound effects. Silence rushed back into the room, heavy and cold. I looked at the man in the window across the street. He was slumped over his desk, his head in his hands. He looked defeated. But I felt no pity. I looked at the spreadsheet on my screen. The debt to Vargas was due in 48 hours. If Lucas didn't pay, they wouldn't just break his legs. They would come for the collateral. They would come for my house. I needed to accelerate the timeline. I needed to make him desperate enough to make a mistake, but not desperate enough to run. I needed to pin him down. I opened a new email window. I used an anonymous remailer service. I attached a file. It wasn't the power of attorney. It was a single image. A screenshot of his secret Vargas folder. Subject line, "I know who owns the house." I hit send. Across the street, I saw Lucas sit up. He clicked his mouse. He stared at the screen. Then he stood up and threw his chair through the glass partition of his office. The game had entered the next phase. He knew he was being watched, but he didn't know who was watching. He would blame Megan. He would blame Aris. He would tear his own alliance apart, trying to find the leak, and I would be right here watching from the shadows, tightening the noose with every passing hour. The audit was over. The liquidation was about to begin. I sat in the darkened apartment, the glow of the monitor illuminating the dust motes, dancing in the stale air, and watched my son commit the ultimate administrative sin. He wasn't just stealing my money anymore. He was stealing my existence. On the screen, through the hacked connection to his laptop, I watched Lucas fill out a PDF form with the kind of frantic speed that breeds fatal errors. It was a state of Florida death certificate. He wasn't waiting for nature to take its course. He wasn't even waiting for his hired thugs to stage an accident. He was digitally murdering me. He had downloaded a template from the dark web, a high-resolution forgery that would pass a cursory inspection by a crooked title company. Under cause of death, he typed accidental drowning. Under place of death, he listed a beach in Miami I hadn't visited since 1988. He was erasing 40 years of my life with a few keystrokes, turning me into a statistic, so he could liquidate my estate before the weekend. The sheer coldness of it should have broken me. It should have made me weep for the boy I used to carry on my shoulders at the zoo. But the Thomas Sterling who would have cried was gone, replaced by the auditor, who saw only a fraudulent transaction that needed to be corrected. Lucas was rushing. He was sloppy. He needed to close the deal with Vargas, the mob financier, and Vargas wouldn't accept a property with a living owner attached to the deed. He needed a corpse, or at least a piece of paper that said there was one. I reached for the burner phone. It was time to bring in the heavy artillery. I dialed Harrington. Harrington was the kind of lawyer who didn't have a website. He didn't advertise on billboards. His number was passed on handwritten notes in the back rooms of private clubs. He handled problems that couldn't exist on paper until they were solved. I had saved his career 15 years ago when I found a discrepancy in his firm's escrow account that would have disbarred him. He owed me, and Harrington always paid his debts. "I need a meeting," I said when he answered. "Tonight." The usual place. The usual place was a crypt, literally. Harrington owned a family mausoleum in the oldest cemetery in the city, a Gothic structure with a heavy iron gate and no surveillance cameras. It was morbid, but it was secure. I drove the rental van to the cemetery gates at 2:00 a.m., slipped through the pedestrian entrance and walked to the Sterling plot. Harrington was already there, leaning against the marble, smoking a cigar that smelled of vanilla and expensive scotch. He didn't look surprised to see me alive. In our line of work, survival was just another variable. "You look like hell, Thomas," he said, offering me the cigar case. "I feel like a man who just watched his own autopsy," I replied, declining the smoke. "We have a problem, Harrington. Lucas is forging a death certificate. He is going to sell the house to the Vargas cartel within 48 hours. Harrington whistled low. "Vargas. Your boy aims high. If he sells that house to Vargas and Vargas finds out the title is dirty, they won't sue him. They will peel him. That is the plan," I said. "But I need to make sure the title is radioactive. I need to make sure that when Lucas hands over the keys, he is handing over a death sentence." I pulled a folder from my jacket. Inside were the documents I had drafted in Mrs. Higgins's kitchen, refined with my forensic knowledge. It was a revocable living trust dated 5 years ago. It was impeccable. But it needed a teeth. It needed a trigger. "I need you to file this," I said. "But not publicly. Not yet. I need you to execute a pocket filing. Record the transfer of the deed into the trust effective immediately, but place a seal on the record that only lifts if a transfer of ownership is attempted by a third party." Harrington looked at the document under the beam of his penlight. He smiled, the expression of a shark sensing blood in the water. "A poison pill," he mused. "The moment Lucas tries to record the sale to Vargas, the title search will hit this trust. The system will automatically flag the sale as fraudulent because the house doesn't belong to Thomas Sterling anymore. It belongs to the Catherine Sterling Charity. Exactly, I said. But Lucas won't know. He will sign the papers with Vargas. He will take Vargas's money. And an hour later, when Vargas's lawyers try to file the deed, they will realize they bought nothing. They will realize Lucas defrauded them. And by then Harrington finished, Lucas will have the money, but he won't have the house. And Vargas will want his $5 million back, plus interest, plus blood. It is a brutal play, Thomas Harrington said, closing the folder. You are signing your son's execution order. He signed mine this morning, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. He typed drowning on a government form while sipping my coffee. He made his choice. Just file the papers, Harrington, and make sure the beneficiary is irrevocable. If I survive this, I want every dime to go to that shelter. Done, Harrington said. He shook my hand. His grip was warm, alive. It was the only human contact I had felt in days that didn't feel like a betrayal. Stay invisible, Thomas. The moment that filing hits the server, the clock starts ticking. I left the cemetery feeling lighter. The trap was set. The legal mechanism was in place. Now I needed to light the fuse. I needed to make Lucas paranoid. I needed to make him sloppy. A calm criminal is dangerous. A panicked criminal makes mistakes. I drove back to my observation post across the street from Lucas's office. It was nearly dawn. The lights in his office were still on. He was pulling an all-nighter, probably forging the notary stamps on the death certificate. I watched him pace. He looked manic, energized by the crime he was committing. He thought he was winning. He thought he was the smartest man in the room. I opened my laptop. I needed to send a message. Not an email this time. An email can be deleted. I needed something physical. Something he couldn't ignore. Something that would sit on his desk and stare at him. I scrolled through the photos I had taken from Mrs. Higgins's window during the casino night. There were hundreds. Lucas doing drugs. Megan wearing the necklace. Dr. Aris dealing pills. But I needed something specific. Something that would turn them against each other. I found it. It was a photo taken at 2:00 a.m. Lucas was in the kitchen. He wasn't with Megan. He was with Dr. Aris. They were standing by the open safe, my safe, counting a stack of cash. But Lucas wasn't putting the money in the bag for Vargas. He was sliding a thick bundle of $100 bills into his own jacket pocket. He was skimming. He was stealing from the mob he was terrified of, and he was stealing from his wife's share. And in the background of the photo, looking at them from the doorway, was Megan. She had seen it. The look on her face wasn't love. It was calculation. She hadn't confronted him then. She had filed it away. I printed the photo on high-gloss paper. It was grainy, but the action was unmistakable. Lucas's hand in his pocket. The bulge of cash. I took a red marker and wrote across the bottom of the photo in jagged, aggressive letters, "I know what you are keeping for yourself." I put the photo in a thick manila envelope. I didn't address it to Lucas. I addressed it to the occupant. But I added a personal touch. I slipped in a single dried white rose from Mrs. Higgins' garden, Catherine's favorite flower, a symbol from the grave. I called a courier service, a bike messenger who didn't ask questions. I paid him triple to deliver it within the hour. I watched from my window as the messenger arrived at the building. I saw him enter the lobby. 5 minutes later, I saw Lucas's office door open. His secretary, a young woman he hadn't paid in 2 months, handed him the envelope. Lucas sat down. He opened it. He pulled out the photo. Even from across the street, I saw the color drain from his face. He dropped the photo as if it were burning hot. He stood up, spinning around, scanning the room for cameras. He checked the ceiling. He checked the lamps. He thought he was being watched from the inside. Then he looked at the photo again. He looked at the red writing. And then he picked up his phone. He didn't call the police. He called Megan. I put on my headphones, tuning into the frequency of the bug in the orchid. I needed to hear this. Pick up, you useless." Lucas hissed into the phone. Megan answered. "What, I'm busy packing the silver." "Did you tell anyone?" Lucas screamed. "Did you tell anyone about the skim?" "What are you talking about?" Megan sounded confused but defensive. "Someone sent me a photo." "Megan, a photo of me taking the cash from the safe. Someone was in the house. Someone saw me." Megan went silent. Then her voice turned ice cold. "You took cash from the safe. You told me the safe was empty. You told me we barely covered the VIG." Lucas stammered. He realized he had just played himself. He had let his paranoia reveal his greed. "It was for us. For the escape fund." "You liar," Megan spat. "You are hoarding. You are planning to leave without me, aren't you? That's why you wanted the power of attorney solely in your name. That's why you forged the death certificate alone. No, Megan, listen. Someone is watching us. The photo. It has a rose. A white rose." "A rose," Megan's voice trembled. "Catherine's flowers." "Yes, who sent this? Who knows? I don't know." Megan screamed. "Maybe it's Aris. Maybe he wants a bigger cut. Or maybe it's Vargas. Maybe they know you are holding out on them." "If Vargas knew, I would be dead already," Lucas whispered. "It's someone else. Someone close." There was a pause. A heavy, suspicious silence stretched between them over the phone line. "Where are you right now?" Lucas asked, his voice dropping to a menacing register. "I'm at the house," Megan said. "Why are you alone?" "Yes." "Don't lie to me, Megan. Did you take the photo? Are you trying to blackmail me? Is that your plan? You get the house, you get the cash, and I get the bullet." "You are insane," Megan said. "You are high." "I'm coming home," Lucas said. "And you better be there. And the money better be there. If I find out you are working with someone—" He hung up. He didn't even grab his jacket. He ran out of the office, leaving the door wide open. I watched him go, a smile touching my lips for the first time in weeks. The seed was planted. The roots were spreading fast. They weren't partners anymore. They were enemies trapped in a sinking ship, fighting over the only life raft. Lucas thought the threat was coming from the outside. Megan thought the threat was coming from Lucas. Neither of them suspected that the architect of their destruction was sitting across the street, eating a stale bagel and conducting the final audit of their lives. I checked the time. It was 11:00 a.m. The closing with Vargas's shell company was scheduled for tomorrow night. I had 30 hours to turn their paranoia into total psychological collapse. I picked up the burner phone again. It was time to contact Dr. Aris. He was the weak link. He was the coward. If I squeezed him, he wouldn't just crack. He would explode. I typed a text message. Simple. Direct. "I have the toxicology report from the old man's blood. I know about the arsenic. I know about the pill mill. The DEA is asking questions. Meet me at the pier in 1 hour if you want to stay out of prison." I hit send. The trap was no longer just about money. It was about survival. And when rats are fighting for survival, they eat their own. I sat back and waited for the chaos to bloom. The audio feed from the orchid in my kitchen crackled with static before resolving into the sound of a door being kicked open. I was back in the apartment across from Lucas's office, but my ears were inside the house I had built, listening to my family tear itself apart. Lucas had driven home like a man possessed, running 2 red lights that I tracked via the GPS on his cloned phone. He wasn't going home to apologize. He was going home to secure his assets. "Megan, where are you?" Lucas screamed. His voice distorted by the microphone, but the panic was crystal clear. I heard the sound of a zipper, the rustle of fabric. Megan was in the master bedroom. My bedroom. "I'm leaving, Lucas," I heard her shout back. Her voice wasn't the terrified whisper I had heard on the phone earlier. It was shrill, hysterical. "I am not staying here to be murdered by the cartel because you can't do math." I heard heavy footsteps pounding up the stairs. Then the sound of a struggle. A bag hitting the floor. A slap. "You aren't going anywhere," Lucas roared. "You think you can just walk out with the silver?" "With the cash, that is my money." "It's our money," Megan screamed. "I earned it. I wore that old man's jewelry. I served drinks to your filthy friends. I risked jail for you." "And what did you do? You skimmed. You stole from the safe. I didn't steal. I was saving it for us, for the getaway." "Liar, you were going to leave me here holding the bag." "I saw the tickets, Lucas. I saw the reservation in your laptop bag. 1 ticket to the Cayman Islands." 1. I sat back in my chair, a cold smile playing on my lips. I hadn't planted the ticket. That was all Lucas. He really had planned to abandon her. The depths of his selfishness were bottomless. I heard the sound of glass breaking. A lamp, probably. One of Catherine's Tiffany lamps. A pang of sorrow hit me, but I pushed it down. Objects could be replaced. Justice could not. "Listen to me," Lucas shouted, breathless. "We are in this together. If I go down, you go down. You signed the checks, Megan. You used his credit cards. You forged the signature on the medical proxy. You are just as guilty as I am." "I'm not guilty if I turn state's witness," Megan yelled. "I'll tell them you forced me. I'll tell them you threatened me. You wouldn't dare. Watch me." The fighting descended into incoherent screaming and the sounds of physical altercation. They were rats in a bucket, biting and scratching, desperate to climb over each other to escape the rising water. But the water was rising because I had opened the floodgates. I checked the time. It was 2:02 p.m. They were distracted. They were focused on each other. It was time to introduce the predator that would make them forget their domestic squabble. I opened the encrypted messaging app on my laptop. I had the contact information for Vargas's organization. Not the direct line to the boss, but the number for his collections manager, a man named Silas. I had found it in Lucas's phone records, a number he texted constantly, with pleading emojis. I typed a message. I attached the photo of Lucas stuffing cash into his pocket, the same photo I had sent to Lucas, but this time it was going to the man he stole from. "Your boy is packing a bag. He has $200,000 of your casino take in a suitcase, and he bought a one-way ticket to Grand Cayman for tonight. He isn't selling the house, he is running." I hit send. Then I sat back and waited. It didn't take long. Less than 10 minutes later, the audio feed from the kitchen went silent. The fighting stopped. "What was that?" Megan whispered. I heard a car door slam outside. Heavy boots on the pavement. Not one pair. 3 or 4. "Oh God," Lucas whimpered. "It's them. It's Silas." "Why are they here?" Megan hissed. "You said we had until Friday?" "Someone told them," Lucas whispered. His voice was trembling so hard I could almost feel the vibration through the speakers. "Someone told them I was running." The front door didn't open. It exploded inward. I heard the wood splintering, the lock shattering. "My front door." "Lucas." A deep, gravelly voice boomed through the house. It sounded like tectonic plates grinding together. "Come out, little man, or we come up." I heard scrambling footsteps. They were running down the stairs, surrendering before the hunt even began. "Please, Silas." "Please," Lucas was crying now. "It's a misunderstanding. I wasn't running. I was gathering the funds." I heard a sickening thud, a body hitting the floor. Lucas had been struck. "Gathering funds in a suitcase?" Silas asked. His voice was calm, which made it terrifying. "We got a picture, Lucas. A very nice picture of you putting our money in your pocket." "I didn't." "It's a lie. It's..." Silence. Another hit. A gasp of pain from Megan. "Don't touch her," Lucas screamed. "Shut up," Silas said. "Listen to me very carefully, Lucas. Mr. Vargas is very disappointed. He thought you were a partner. He thought this house was a good investment. But now he thinks you are a liability. I can pay, I have a buyer, $10 million, he is signing tomorrow. Tomorrow is a long time away, Silas said. And trusting you is getting expensive. You owe us $5 million principal, plus the skimming, plus the insult. Let's call it $6 million. $6 million, Lucas stuttered. Cash, today. Or we take the house, and we take you, and we take her, and we sell you all for parts. You have good kidneys, Lucas. They fetch a high price. I heard Megan sobbing uncontrollably. She was hyperventilating. You have until sundown tomorrow, Silas said. But we aren't leaving. My men will be outside. If you try to leave this house, if you try to go to the airport, if you make a phone call to anyone other than your buyer, we come back inside, and we won't knock next time. I heard them leave. The door hung open for a moment, letting in the sounds of the street before Lucas slammed it shut and locked the deadbolt, a futile gesture against men who broke doors for a living. The silence that followed was heavy with the scent of imminent death. We are dead, Megan whispered. We are actually dead. No, Lucas said. His voice was manic again. The panic had pushed him past fear into a state of delirious problem-solving. No. We have the buyer. The 10 million. The buyer is fake, Megan screamed. You said it yourself. It's a shell company. You don't even know who they are. What if they don't show up? What if the wire doesn't clear in time? It has to clear, Lucas yelled. But she was right. He couldn't rely on a closing that might take days to fund. He needed cash. Liquid cash. Immediately. I listened as he paced the kitchen floor, back and forth, his shoes squeaking on the tile. We need insurance, he muttered. We need more than the house sale. We need a backup. What kind of backup? Megan asked. We maxed out the credit cards. We drained the accounts. We have nothing. We have the stuff, Lucas said. The inventory. What inventory? The house, Megan, the things inside it, the paintings, the silver Catherine's jewelry, the antique furniture. The rug in the library is worth $20,000 alone. You want to sell the furniture? Megan asked, incredulous. To who? Pawn shops won't take this much high-end stuff without questions. Not pawn shops, Lucas said. His voice was rising with excitement. A private sale. An auction tonight, Lucas said. He was snapping his fingers now, the sound sharp and frantic. We still have the contact list from the casino night. The high rollers, the collectors, the people who buy things without asking for receipts. We call them back. We tell them we are liquidating the estate. Everything must go, cash and carry. You want to turn the house into a flea market for gangsters? Megan asked. It's a fire sale, Megan. We sell the art. We sell the jewelry. We sell the silverware. We can raise another $1 million tonight if we price it right. That gives us cash to pay Silas the VIG to buy us time for the main sale to close. It's insane, Megan said. It's survival, Lucas shouted. Get your phone, call everyone. Tell them doors open at 8:00 p.m. Tell them it's an exclusive estate liquidation. Tell them the old man died and left a treasure trove. I sat in my apartment, listening to my son plan the wholesale looting of my life. He was going to sell my history to the highest bidder to save his own skin. He was going to invite the vultures back into the carcass. It was perfect. It was exactly what I needed. He was gathering everyone in one place. The criminals, the evidence, the stolen goods. He was creating a density of felonies that no prosecutor could ignore, and he was doing it on a timeline that matched my own. I picked up the burner phone. I sent a text to Harrington. The closing is still on. But bring cash, a lot of it. We are going to an auction. Then I texted Kowalski. Tonight is the night. 8:00 p.m. They are hosting a sale. Bring the van. And bring the projection equipment. I looked at the screen at the hacked email account. I saw the invites going out. Lucas was desperate. He was blasting the email to every shady contact he had. Flash sale, estate liquidation, cash only, no questions asked. I stood up and walked to the closet. I took out the suit I had packed. It was a charcoal gray three-piece suit. The suit I wore when I testified in court. The suit I wore when I buried my wife. It hung a little loose on me now. The stress had taken its toll, but it still looked authoritative. I shaved. I trimmed my hair. I took a double dose of aspirin to steady my hands. Tonight, I wasn't going to be the victim hiding in the bushes. I wasn't going to be the voice on the phone. Tonight, I was going to attend the auction. But I wasn't going to bid. I was going to bring the gavel down. I waited until dusk settled over the city. The streetlights flickered on, illuminating the stage for the final act. I watched as Lucas and Megan ran around the house like ants in a disturbed hill. They were tagging furniture with sticky notes, pricing my memories. The grandfather clock, $5,000. The oil painting of the harbor, $10,000. The urn on the mantelpiece. I saw Megan hesitate, then push it behind a curtain. Even she had limits, or perhaps she just knew Ash didn't have a resale value. At 7:30 p.m., the cars started arriving again. The same black SUVs, the same sports cars. The vultures had returned to pick the bones clean. I left the apartment. I drove the rental van to the rendezvous point 2 blocks from my house. Kowalski was there. He was leaning against a black tactical van looking like a retired linebacker who still enjoyed a fight. He had 2 men with him, tech specialists. "You ready for this, Mr.?" Sterling Kowalski asked, tossing a cigarette onto the pavement and grinding it out with his heel. I looked toward my house. I could see the glow of the lights. I could hear the faint bass of music. They were trying to make it a party again, trying to mask the desperation with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. "I am ready," I said. "Did you set up the perimeter?" Kowalski nodded. "We have cameras on the front and back. We intercepted the security feed. We control the lights, the sound, and the locks. The house is yours whenever you want it." "Not yet," I said. "Let them buy. Let money change hands. Let them commit the crime. We wait for the main event. We wait for the sale of the deed." I climbed into the back of the tactical van. Inside it looked like the cockpit of a spaceship. Screens covered the wall. On the monitors, I saw the interior of my home in high definition. Kowalski had tapped into the security cameras Lucas had installed to protect his drug stash. I saw the living room. It was crowded. Men were inspecting the silverware. A woman in a fur coat was holding up Catherine's crystal vase to the light. Lucas was standing on a chair, acting as the auctioneer. He was sweating, his tie loosened, shouting numbers. 5,000. "Do I hear 6,000 for the Persian rug, hand-woven silk sold to the gentleman in the red jacket. Cash on the barrel." He was selling my rug, the one we bought in Istanbul on our honeymoon. My hands clenched into fists. Patience. Patience. I watched as the night wore on. The pile of cash on the dining table grew. Lucas was raking it in. He looked ecstatic. He thought he was going to make it. He thought he was going to pay Silas and walk away free. Then, at 10:00 p.m., the crowd quieted. Lucas clapped his hands. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice hoarse, "we have the main item of the evening, the property itself, the deed to this magnificent estate." He held up a document. It was the deed, or at least the forgery he had created. "We have a private buyer who has offered $10 million, Lucas shouted. "But cash is king. If anyone here can match the offer in verified funds tonight." The door opened. A man walked in. He was tall, wearing a bespoke suit and carrying a silver briefcase. He looked out of place among the thugs and gamblers. It was Harrington. He walked through the crowd, the sea of criminals parting for him. He walked right up to Lucas. "Mr. Sterling Harrington," said, his voice calm and projecting clearly. "I represent the consortium. We are prepared to close. Now." Lucas's eyes bulged. He looked at the briefcase. He looked at Harrington. He looked at Silas, who was standing in the corner, arms crossed, watching. "Show me the money," Lucas whispered. Harrington placed the briefcase on the table right next to the pile of dirty cash. He clicked the latches open. Inside, stacked in neat rows, were bearer bonds. Negotiable. Untraceable. $10 million! The room gasped. Even Silas looked impressed. Lucas reached out a trembling hand. He touched the paper. It was real. "Sold," Lucas screamed. "Sold to the gentleman." He grabbed the deed. He grabbed a pen. "Sign it," Harrington said. "Sign over the title, and the house is yours." Lucas scribbled his signature. He signed his name. He signed my name as the witness, forging it right there in front of 50 witnesses. "Done," Lucas yelled. "It's done, I'm rich." He grabbed the briefcase. He hugged it to his chest. He looked at Megan. "We did it." And that was the moment. The darkness inside the house was absolute, a sudden suffocating void that swallowed the triumph of the auction in a single heartbeat. The screams that erupted weren't just of surprise. They were the primal sounds of predators who suddenly realized they were trapped in a cage. I heard the distinct metallic click of gunslides being racked, the sound of chairs overturning, and the frantic shuffling of feet on the hardwood. In the chaos, Silas's voice boomed out, commanding his men to hold their positions, but even his authority was drowned out by the sheer panic of the moment. Then the beam of light cut through the gloom. It originated from the crystal chandelier above the dining table, a piercing shaft of white illumination that hit the large blank wall above the fireplace like a cinema projector. The room fell silent, the kind of stunned silence that precedes a catastrophe. Every eye turned to the wall. The video that began to play was grainy shot in the stark black and white of night vision, but the faces were unmistakable. It was the footage from the kitchen recorded just 24 hours prior. The audio, amplified by the hacked sound system, was crisp, every syllable, a hammer blow to the silence. Lucas was on the screen. He was leaning over the granite island, mixing a white powder into a glass of water. Beside him stood Megan, her face twisted in a mask of greedy anticipation. "He won't remember a thing," Lucas's recorded voice echoed through the room, bouncing off the walls of the house he thought he had just sold. "We switch the pills. We sell the house. The old man rots in Florida. By the time they do an autopsy, the arsenic will be untraceable." A gasp rippled through the crowd. These were criminals, yes. They were thieves, fences, and mobsters. But even among wolves, patricide is a taboo that turns the stomach. I watched from the shadows of the foyer as faces turned toward Lucas. The Russian woman looked disgusted. The man in the tracksuit took a step back. The video cut to a new scene. It was Dr. Aris. He was handing Lucas a vial, his face illuminated by the harsh light of the refrigerator. "This will stop his heart if you give him too much," Aris said on the screen. "Be careful. We need him alive until he signs the power of attorney. If he dies before he signs, the probate court freezes everything." I know, Lucas snapped in the video. "Just give me the stuff. I'll make sure he signs, even if I have to hold his hand while he shakes." The footage froze on that image, Lucas reaching for the poison, his face illuminated by the greed that had consumed him. The red emergency lights I had rigged flickered on, bathing the room in a hellish blood-colored glow. The front door, the heavy oak entrance that had welcomed friends and family for 40 years, swung open with a slow, deliberate creak. The night air rushed in, cold and sharp, carrying the scent of impending justice. I stepped into the frame. I didn't walk with the cane I had used for the last 2 years. I didn't stoop. I wore the charcoal gray suit, my spine straight, my shoulders squared. I was Thomas Sterling, the man who had hunted corruption in the boardrooms of Chicago for 4 decades. Flanking me were Detective Kowalski and a phalanx of SWAT officers in tactical gear, their rifles raised, their movements silent and lethal. The room seemed to shrink. The air left the lungs of every person present. Lucas stood frozen in the center of the room, the silver briefcase still clutched to his chest like a shield. He looked at the video paused on the wall. Then he looked at me. His brain couldn't process the data. The cognitive dissonance was shattering him in real time. His face went from pale to a translucent shade of gray. His mouth opened and closed, a fish gasping on a dock. "Dad," he whispered. It was a sound so small it barely carried across the room. "Dad, you are in Florida. You are gone." I walked forward. The crowd of gangsters parted for me as if I were Moses parting the Red Sea. They shrank away, terrified not just of the police behind me, but of the resurrection they were witnessing. They knew a dead man walking when they saw one, and in that moment I was the specter of judgment. I stopped 10 feet from my son. I looked him up and down. I looked at the sweat staining his collar. I looked at the terror in his eyes. I looked at the briefcase full of fake money he was holding. I never went to Florida. "Lucas," I said. My voice was calm, steady, projecting to the back of the room without the need to shout. "I never got on that plane. But I dropped you off, Lucas." Stammered, his legs shaking so hard I thought he might collapse. "I saw you go through security. I have the tracking on your phone. You tracked a burner phone I left in a trash can at Terminal 3, I said coldly. "And while you were celebrating my departure, while you were moving these vultures into my home, I was right here." I took a step closer. "I was right beside you, Lucas. I was watching from across the street while you sold my furniture. I was listening when you plotted to overdose me. I was there when you forged my signature on your death warrant. I watched you sell your soul piece by piece, and I wanted to see exactly how cheap the price was." Lucas looked at the briefcase. He looked at Silas, who was now staring at him with murderous intent. He looked back at me. "It was 10 million. Lucas wheezed, holding up the case. "I did it for us, Dad. I did it to save the house. I have the money. Look, it's $10 million. We are rich. We can fix this." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound that echoed in the tense room. "You aren't rich, Lucas," I said. "Open the case. Look at the bonds. Really look at them." Lucas fumbled with the latches. He popped the lid. He grabbed a stack of the bonds. He held them up to the red light. For the first time, he read the fine print in the corner. "For motion picture use only." The scream that tore from his throat was primal. It was the sound of a man watching his life incinerate. He threw the bonds into the air. They fluttered down around him like confetti at a funeral. "It's fake," he shrieked. "It's all fake." "Yes," I said. "The money is fake. The buyer was fake. The sale was fake." I pointed a finger at him, a gesture of accusation that felt like pulling a trigger. "But the crime, Lucas, the crime is real. The fraud is real. The attempted murder is real." Silas stepped forward. The giant enforcer didn't care about the police. He didn't care about the drama. He cared about his money. He realized in that second that there was no $10 million. There was no payoff. There was only a snitch and a trap. "You set me up," Silas growled at Lucas. "You brought me here to be arrested." "No," Lucas yelled, backing away until he hit the table. "No. It was him, my father. He is the one. He tricked us." Silas raised his gun. "Drop it!" Kowalski shouted. A dozen red laser dots appeared on Silas's chest. The SWAT team moved in a blur of motion. Flashbangs detonated near the windows, filling the room with blinding light and a deafening bang. "Police, get down! Federal agents! Nobody move!" The room erupted into chaos. The mobsters dove for the floor. The women screamed. Dr. Aris tried to bolt for the kitchen door, but a tactical officer tackled him into the china cabinet, shattering the last of Catherine's good plates. Megan fell to her knees, sobbing, trying to pull the necklace off her neck. trying to hide the evidence of her greed. But her hands were shaking too much to work the clasp. Lucas didn't move. He stood in the center of the storm, surrounded by the swirling blizzard of fake bonds. He looked at me. He ignored the SWAT team. He ignored Silas being handcuffed. He ignored his wife screaming. He only saw me. "Dad, help me," he pleaded. His voice was small, broken, the voice of the child who used to ask me to check under the bed for monsters. "Please, tell them. Tell them it was a mistake. I'm your son. You can't let them take me." I looked at him. I looked at the face that shared my features. I looked at the eyes that were so much like his mother's. And for a second, I felt the pull. The biological imperative to protect him, to shield him, to take the blame. But then I looked at the wall. The video was still playing on a loop. He rots in Florida. I walked up to him. The SWAT officers held their fire, sensing the moment. I leaned in close, so close I could smell the fear and the expensive scotch on his breath. "I taught you how to live. Lucas," I whispered, my voice hard as granite. "I taught you honor. I taught you hard work. But you didn't want that lesson. You wanted the easy way. You wanted the shortcut." I reached out and plucked a single fake bond from his shoulder where it had landed. "You chose how to die, son," I said. "You chose to be a predator. And now you are going to learn what happens when the prey bites back." I turned my back on him. It was the hardest thing I have ever done and the most necessary. "Officer," I said to the SWAT captain, pointing over my shoulder. "That man, Lucas Sterling, he is the ringleader. Check his left jacket pocket. You will find the original forged death certificate he was planning to file tomorrow. And check the safe in the study. You will find the narcotics distribution ledger." Lucas screamed. It wasn't a word. It was just a sound of total desolation. "Dad, no, Dad," I walked away. I walked past Megan, who reached out to grab my pant leg. "Thomas, please," she wailed. "He made me do it." I was scared. I looked down at her. I looked at the diamond necklace she was still wearing. "You weren't scared when you were drinking my wine, Megan," I said. "You weren't scared when you stole my wife's jewelry. You were only scared when you got caught." I signaled to an officer. "Get that necklace into evidence," I said. "It belongs to a ghost." I walked out the front door, stepping over the splintered wood of the frame. I walked out onto the lawn into the cool night air. The street was filled with flashing lights. Sirens wailed in the distance, a symphony of consequences. Neighbors were coming out of their houses watching the spectacle. I saw Mrs. Higgins standing on her porch holding Buster on a leash. My dog. He saw me. He barked a happy, familiar sound and strained against the lead. I walked over to him. I knelt down and buried my face in the dog's fur. He smelled like home. He smelled like loyalty. "Is it done?" Mrs. Higgins asked softly. I stood up and looked back at the house. I saw Lucas being led out in handcuffs. He was weeping, his head hanging low. I saw Silas being shoved into a van. I saw Dr. Aris being read his rights. "It is done," I said. "The house is clean." But it wasn't just clean. It was empty. The victory tasted like ash. I had won, but I had lost the only family I had left. I had cut out the cancer, but the surgery had left a gaping wound. However, as I watched the police tape being strung across my driveway, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I had protected Catherine's legacy. I had stopped a monster before he could hurt anyone else. I had stood my ground. Kowalski walked up to me, lighting a cigarette. "That was one hell of a show, Mr. Sterling," he said. "You sure you used to be just an accountant?" I looked at him. I looked at the ruins of my life. "I was never just an accountant, Kowalski," I said. "I was a father. And tonight I had to do the one thing a father should never have to do." What is that I had to bury my son? I said. I took Buster's leash from Mrs. Higgins. Come on, boy, I said. Let's go. We have a lot of work to do. We walked away from the flashing lights into the darkness of the street, leaving the wreckage of the past behind us. The night was over, but the dawn was coming, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what it would bring. I was Thomas Sterling, and I was still here. Even as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, tightening against the skin, with a cold finality, Lucas did not stop fighting. He wasn't fighting the SWAT officers who were dragging him toward the door. He was fighting reality. He was wrestling with the math in his head, the desperate calculation of a gambler who believes he has played the perfect hand even as the casino burns down around him. He twisted his body, his face flushed with a manic, feverish mix of terror and triumph, and looked back at me. He looked at the silver briefcase spilling the fake movie money onto the floor, but then his eyes darted to his phone, which lay on the table where he had dropped it when the lights went out. The screen was still glowing. It showed a banking app. It showed a balance. You can't do this to me, Lucas screamed, his voice shredding in his throat as he fought the officer's grip. You can arrest me, you can send me to jail. But you can't take the win. I sold the house, the contract is signed. The wire transfer hit my account 10 minutes ago. He was laughing now, a broken, jagged sound that bounced off the walls of the room. I checked the balance. $10 million, it is in the Cayman shell account. It is offshore. You can't touch it. I'll hire the best lawyers in the world. I'll buy my way out of this. I beat you, Dad. I sold your house and I have your money. The officers paused for a second, looking at me. Even in the chaos of a federal raid, the claim of $10 million carries a weight that demands a moment of silence. Lucas was hanging there, suspended between the arms of two tactical agents, a sneer of victory plastering his sweaty face. He truly believed that money was the ultimate immunity. He believed that, because he saw numbers on a screen, he had escaped the trap. I walked over to the table. I didn't look at the fake bonds. I picked up his phone. I looked at the screen. Indeed, the banking app showed a pending incoming wire of $10 million. It looked real. It looked like freedom. I turned the phone around so he could see it one last time. Then I looked him in the eye, and I smiled. It wasn't a smile of joy. It was the smile of an auditor who has just found the discrepancy that sends a CEO to prison for life. You are right, Lucas, I said, my voice calm, cutting through his hysteria like a scalpel. You did sell the house. The contract is valid. The transfer was initiated. But you made one critical error in your due diligence. You never asked who the buyer was. Lucas blinked, sweat dripping into his eyes. It was the consortium, he spat. Harrington's client. Harrington's client is me, I said. The words hung in the air. Lucas stopped struggling, his brow furrowed as his brain tried to process the information. What he whispered. I bought the house, Lucas. I used the Catherine Sterling Trust. The money you see on that screen, that isn't foreign investor capital. That is your mother's money. That is the inheritance you thought you were going to steal when I died. I used it to buy my own home back from the thief who stole it. Lucas shook his head, a twitch starting in his left eye. No, that's impossible. The trust is locked until you die. I amended the trust 3 days ago, I said, stepping closer. I unlocked the liquidity for a singular purpose: asset recovery. I bought the house to ensure that when the deed was transferred, it didn't go to a shell company in Panama. It went back to the family. The house belongs to me, Lucas. It never left my hands. You just signed a piece of paper that legally confirms you sold it to me. Lucas looked at the phone, then at me. But I have the money, he said, his voice trembling, clinging to the last spar of his sinking ship. It's $10 million. It's in my account. I can still pay Silas. I can still pay the lawyers. It's my money now. I laughed then. It was a short, sharp bark of sound. You really don't understand who I am, do you, son? You forgot what I did for 40 years. I didn't just catch people who stole money. I caught people who tried to hide it. I pulled another document from the inside pocket of my charcoal suit. It was a fax, still warm, stamped with the seal of the Department of Justice. That account in the Caymans. The one you set up last week to receive the funds, I said. I didn't just know about it. I flagged it. Flagged it, Lucas breathed. I contacted the FBI 3 hours ago. I explained, keeping my tone conversational, as if I were explaining a tax deduction. I provided them with the routing number. I provided them with the evidence that the account was being used to receive proceeds from illegal narcotics sales and real estate fraud. I held up the fax. This is a freezing order, Lucas, issued by the Office of Foreign Assets Control. The moment that wire hit your account, the trap snapped shut. The funds are frozen. They aren't yours. They aren't mine anymore either. They are evidence. Lucas stared at the paper. His knees gave way. The officers had to hold him up to keep him from hitting the floor. You froze the money, he choked out. I didn't just freeze it, I said. I weaponized it. You see, by accepting a wire transfer of $10 million into an account flagged for laundering, you just committed a federal felony that carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 20 years. You didn't just sell the house to me. You sold your freedom for a number on a screen you will never be able to spend. Lucas looked at the phone again. The numbers were there, mocking him. $10 million. So close he could almost touch it, and yet it was as distant as the moon. But Silas, he whispered. He looked over his shoulder. Silas the enforcer was being cuffed by 3 agents. He was on his knees, bleeding from a cut on his forehead. But he wasn't looking at the police. He was looking at Lucas. Silas had heard everything. He heard that the house was gone. He heard that the money was frozen. He heard that Lucas had led him into a federal trap. And the look on Silas's face was not one of anger. It was a promise. A cold, dead promise of future violence. I leaned in close to Lucas, invading his personal space, forcing him to look at me. You owe the cartel $5 million, Lucas, I whispered. And you just lost their collateral. You lost their money. And you led the FBI to their doorstep. Do you know what happens to people who do that? Lucas has started to cry. It wasn't the manipulative crying he used to get his way. It was the weeping of a man who realizes he has ceased to exist. Dad, please, he sobbed. You can't leave me with them. They will kill me in prison. Silas will make a call. I won't last a week. Undo it. Please. Unfreeze the money. Give it to them. Save me. I looked at him. I looked at the tears running down the face of the man who had poisoned my coffee. I looked at the hands that had forged my death certificate. I can't undo it, Lucas, I said softly. I'm just a retired accountant. I don't have the power to stop the federal government. And even if I did... I paused, letting the silence stretch out, letting him feel the weight of the judgment. Why would I save the man who tried to bury me? Lucas wailed. It was a high, thin sound, like a wounded animal. Take him away, I said to the officers. They dragged him out. He kicked and screamed, begging, bargaining with a universe that had stopped listening. He passed Silas on the way out. Silas didn't say a word. He just watched Lucas pass, his eyes tracking him, like a shark tracking a thrashing seal. Lucas screamed louder when he saw that look. He knew that the prison sentence was just the beginning of his punishment. He was walking into a cage with the very beasts he had tried to feed. Harrington walked up to me. He closed the empty briefcase. He looked at the scene, at the shattered remnants of the auction, at the police cataloging the drugs in the study. That was cold, Thomas Harrington said. Technically brilliant, but cold. It was a liquidation, Harrington, I said, straightening my cuffs. He was a toxic asset. I wrote him off. I looked around the room. Megan was gone, taken out the back way. Dr. Eris was in a squad car. The guests were being processed. The house was mine again. But it felt different. It felt heavy. The financial logic was sound. I had used the trust to buy the asset, effectively paying myself with my own money to create a paper trail of fraud against Lucas. It was a closed loop, a perfect circle of destruction. But as I stood there watching the flashing lights reflect off the crystal chandelier, I didn't feel rich. I felt hollow. I had spent 40 years building a fortune to leave to my son. And in one night, I had used that fortune to ensure he would never see daylight again. It was the most expensive purchase of my life. I walked over to the fireplace. The video projector was still on, displaying the frozen image of Lucas's laughing face as he mixed the poison. I pulled the plug. The image vanished. Darkness returned to the corner of the room, but the cost was a line item I would be paying for the rest of my life. I turned away from the wall and walked toward the door, ready to step out into the cool night air, ready to leave the wreckage of the auction behind. The financial twist had worked. The trap had sprung. Now all that was left was the silence. The machinery of justice is chaotic. A swirl of shouting voices, radio static, and the heavy metallic clanking of restraints. But in the center of my living room, amidst the ruins of the auction, there was a singular moment of clarity that was colder than the grave I was supposed to occupy. The SWAT team had secured the perimeter, and the line of prisoners was being formed. Dr. Eris was first. The man who had sworn an oath to do no harm was weeping openly, his white coat stained with wine and dirt, begging the DEA agents to protect his license. He didn't understand yet that his license was the least of his problems. He was facing 20 years for running a pill mill and conspiracy to commit homicide. I watched him go without a flicker of emotion. He was a technician of death, and now he was just a statistic in the federal penitentiary system. Then came Silas. The cartel enforcer was not weeping. He was not begging. He stood tall, his hands cuffed behind his back, blood trickling from a cut above his eye where he had hit the floor. As the officers shoved him forward, he didn't look at me. He didn't look at the police. He locked his eyes on Lucas. It was a look devoid of rage, devoid of heat. It was a look of pure transactional calculation. Lucas owed him $5 million. Lucas had led him into a federal trap. Lucas had cost the organization the house, the money, and the freedom of its lieutenants. In the criminal underworld, that kind of debt is not forgiven. It is collected in blood slowly, usually in the showers of a maximum security prison. Silas smiled at my son, a thin, terrifying stretching of his lips, and mouthed two words that made Lucas's knees buckle. "See you." Lucas collapsed. He had to be held up by two tactical officers. He was sobbing a wet, humiliating sound that echoed off the walls of the house he had tried to steal. He looked at me, his eyes wide with the realization of his true fate. He knew what that look from Silas meant. He knew that the police station was not a sanctuary. It was just a waiting room for his execution. "Dad." "Please," Lucas screamed, fighting against the officers who were dragging him toward the door. "You have to make a call. You know people. Call the judge. Get me solitary confinement. Don't let them put me in general population. Silas will have me killed tonight." "Please, Dad. I am your son. I am your flesh and blood." I walked over to him. I signaled the officers to pause for a second. I stood inches from his face. I saw the terror. I saw the regret. But I didn't see love. I saw a man who was sorry he got caught, sorry he lost, sorry. He was about to pay the bill. I looked at Silas, who was being loaded into the van outside, and then back at Lucas. "You chose your family, Lucas," I said, my voice low and steady. "You chose them when you took their money." You chose them when you let them turn my home into a drug den. You chose them when you decided they were more important than my life. I stepped back, adjusting my cuffs. I am not your father anymore, I said. I am just the witness for the prosecution. And as for your safety, you wanted to be a big man. You wanted to swim with the sharks. Now you are in the tank. Let them take care of you. Lucas wailed a sound of utter desolation as they dragged him out the door. He kicked and screamed, his heels leaving scuff marks on the floor marks that I would have to sand out later. But the night wasn't done with me yet. There was one final loose end. One final lie that needed to be excised. Megan was being let out last. She wasn't fighting. She was walking with her head down her shoulders, shaking. But when she saw me standing there watching the procession, she stopped. She planted her feet. She looked up at me with tear-filled eyes, her makeup running down her face in black streaks. She played her final card. The card she had been holding in reserve since the beginning. "Thomas, wait," she choked out. "You can't send me to prison. You can't let them take me." "You are an accomplice to murder Megan," I said. "You forged checks. You stole jewelry. The law doesn't care if you are crying." "I am pregnant," she blurted out. The words hung in the air. The officers paused. Even Kowalski, who was lighting a cigarette on the porch, stopped and turned around. "I am pregnant with your grandchild." Megan sobbed, her hands going to her stomach. "A baby, Thomas. Lucas's son. Your blood. If you send me to prison, the baby will be born in a cell. He will go into the system. Is that what you want? Do you want your legacy to end in foster care, please? For the baby. Drop the charges. Say I was forced. Say I didn't know." It was a powerful play. The ultimate biological leverage. She knew I had wanted grandchildren for years. She knew Catherine had knitted baby blankets that were still sitting in a cedar chest in the attic, waiting for a child that never came. She thought this would break me. She thought I would melt. I looked at her stomach. Then I looked at her eyes. I walked over to the kitchen island, which was now covered in fingerprint dust and evidence tags. I picked up a small plastic bag. Inside was a glass. A water glass Megan had used earlier that evening before the raid when she was arguing with Lucas. I had seen her drink from it. I had seen her leave it on the counter. And in the chaos of the preparation while they were fighting upstairs, I had swabbed it. "I didn't trust you, Megan," I said, holding up the bag. "I didn't trust you from the moment I saw you wearing Catherine's necklace. So 3 days ago when I was hacking Lucas's accounts, I also hacked his medical records. Did you know Lucas went to a fertility specialist last year?" Megan went pale. Her tears stopped instantly. "He didn't tell you, did he?" I continued, my voice clinical, detached. "Lucas had mumps when he was a teenager. There were complications. He is sterile, Megan. He has been sterile for 20 years. He didn't tell you because he was ashamed. But it is in his file." I took a step closer to her. "So when you told me you were pregnant, I knew one of two things was true. Either it was a lie to manipulate me or you were cheating on him." I held up the glass. I ran a rapid DNA panel on this glass in the van. "Kowalski has a field kit. Technology is a wonderful thing. You are pregnant, Megan. The hormones are in your saliva. But I also ran a comparison against my own DNA and against the sample I have from Lucas." I leaned in close so only she could hear the final verdict. "That baby does not share a single strand of DNA with the Sterling family. It isn't Lucas's. It isn't my grandchild. It is just another lie you carried into my house." Megan's face crumbled. It wasn't the look of a mother protecting her child. It was the look of a con artist whose last hustle had just evaporated. Her knees gave way, and she collapsed onto the floor, wailing. "Who is it?" I asked. "The gray-suited man, one of the high rollers, or just some poor fool you dragged into your web?" She didn't answer. She just screamed a raw animal sound of defeat. "Get her out of here," I said to the officers. They lifted her up and carried her out. She didn't look back. She didn't beg anymore. She knew there was nothing left to sell. I stood in the silence of the empty house. The door was open. The night air was clearing out the smell of smoke and cheap perfume. I looked at the spot where they had stood. My son, my daughter-in-law, my doctor. They were gone. The cancer had been cut out, but the surgery had been brutal. I walked over to the window and looked out at the street. I saw the police vans driving away, their taillights fading into the distance. They were taking away my past. They were taking away the people I had loved or thought I loved. I was alone, truly alone. But as I took a deep breath, filling my lungs without the tightness of the poison, without the weight of the deception, I realized something. I wasn't just alone. I was free. I had faced the worst betrayal a man can face, and I was still standing. I checked my watch. It was midnight. A new day was starting, and for the first time in a long time, the house was quiet, and it was mine. The silence that followed the sirens was heavy, not with emptiness, but with the profound weight of a storm that had finally broken. The police tape came down 2 days later, but the stain of what had happened, the spiritual grime of greed and betrayal, lingered in the corners of the rooms like cobwebs. I hired a professional crew to haul away the gambling tables, the bar, and the chairs that didn't belong to me, but there was a deeper cleaning that required my own hands. I walked through the house with a black garbage bag. I went into the guest room where Megan had slept. I stripped the sheets. I took the pillows. I went into the closet and pulled out the clothes she had left behind, designer dresses bought with my stolen retirement funds. I didn't donate them. You don't donate disease. I went into the study. The desk was clear of drugs, but the chair Lucas had sat in, the leather throne where he had celebrated my demise, felt contaminated. I dragged it out the back door. In the center of the backyard near the old stone fire pit Catherine and I had built 30 years ago, I made a pile. The sheets, the clothes, the chair, the for sale sign Lucas had prematurely printed. I doused it all in lighter fluid. I didn't use the expensive wine Lucas had opened. I used cheap, effective fuel. I struck a match and tossed it onto the heap. The flames roared to life, hungry and bright against the night sky. I stood there watching the fire consume the remnants of my son's ambition. It wasn't arson. It was a cauterization. As the smoke rose, twisting into the dark, I felt the last of the arsenic leaving my spirit. I watched until the fire burned down to embers, turning the artifacts of their betrayal into gray, harmless ash. The next evening, I walked across the lawn to Mrs. Higgins' house. I didn't sneak through the bushes this time. I walked up the front path a free man. I carried a bottle of the vintage Cabernet that had survived the looting and a thick white envelope. Mrs. Higgins opened the door before I knocked. She was wearing her gardening apron, though it was past sunset. "Is it done?" she asked. "The house is clean," I said. "May I come in?" We sat at her kitchen table, the same table where we had conducted our surveillance operation. It felt different now, no longer a bunker, but a place of rest. I slid the envelope across the formica surface. "What is this?" she asked, eyeing it with her sharp, bird-like gaze. "It is the dividend," I said, "for the intelligence, for the nursing, for the loyalty." She opened it. Her eyes widened as she saw the cashier's check. $200,000. A fraction of what I had recovered, but enough to ensure she would never have to worry about the cost of heating oil or cat food again. "Thomas," she said, her voice stern, "I didn't do it for money. I did it because Catherine asked me to watch out for you. I did it because I hate a bully." "I know," I replied, pouring the wine into 2 simple tumblers. "And you saved my life, Martha. This isn't payment. It's a grant. Call it the Martha Higgins Rose Garden Fund. Travel, buy a new car, or just install a better security system. But take it, please. She looked at me, then at the check. She nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. I'll take it, but only if you stay for dinner. I made pot roast. I would love nothing more, I said. We ate in comfortable silence, two survivors of a secret war enjoying the peace that comes after the artillery stops firing. A week later, the house was truly mine again. I had the hardwood floors sanded and refinished to remove the scuff marks of the struggle. I repainted the walls of the living room, covering the shadows of the past with a fresh, clean coat of cream. I placed Catherine's urn back on the mantelpiece, right where it belonged, the centerpiece of a home that had weathered the hurricane. Buster, my old golden retriever, was happy to be back in his spot by the fireplace, but he moved slowly. The ordeal had aged him just as it had aged me. He slept more, his muzzle grayer than before. I looked at him one evening and realized we were two old soldiers in a fortress that felt too large. We needed new energy. We needed a guardian for the peace we had won. I drove to the county animal shelter the next morning. I walked past the rows of cages, looking at the eyes of the unwanted and the abandoned. I stopped at a kennel at the very end of the row. Inside was a German Shepherd mix. He was lean, with a jagged scar across his snout and eyes that were watchful, intelligent, and utterly devoid of fear. He didn't bark at me. He just stood up and pressed his nose against the wire, assessing me. "What's his story?" I asked the volunteer. "Stray," she said. "Found him guarding an abandoned warehouse. He wouldn't let anyone in. He's protective. A bit too intense for most families." I looked at the dog. He looked back, his ears pricked. He looked like he knew the difference between a friend and a threat. "I'm not most families," I said. "I'll take him." "What will you name him?" she asked as I signed the adoption papers. I looked at the dog standing tall and alert by my side. "Justice," I said. I brought him home. Justice introduced himself to Buster with a respectful sniff, and Buster wagged his tail, accepting the reinforcement. They were a team now, the old guard and the new sentry. Tonight, I am sitting on the front porch. The sun is setting, casting long golden shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn. The neighborhood is quiet. The black SUVs are gone. The criminals are in federal custody. The lawyers are filing the final motions. I hold a glass of wine in my hand, watching the light play through the deep red liquid. I take a sip. It tastes like Victory Complex, aged and with a finish that burns just enough to remind you it's real. I look at the empty rocking chair beside me. For the first time in 6 months, the space doesn't feel like a void. It feels like a reserved seat. I feel a lightness in my chest where the pain used to be. I feel Catherine's presence not as a ghost haunting the halls, but as a warm breeze rustling the leaves of the oak tree. She would have hated the mess, but she would have loved the way I handled the cleanup. She would have been proud that I didn't let them take a single brick of what we built together. I look down at my feet. Buster is snoring softly, dreaming of rabbits. Justice is sitting at attention, his amber eyes scanning the street, watching for anything out of place. He's a good dog. He knows his job. I spent my life believing that family was the ultimate bond, that blood was a sacred contract that superseded all other debts. I was wrong. Blood is just biology. It is an accident of birth. I take another sip of wine and lean back, the wood of the chair creaking comfortably under my weight. Blood does not make a family. Loyalty makes a family. Shared values make a family. The people who stand by you when the darkness comes, when the wolves are at the door, they are your family. Whether it is an eccentric neighbor with a listening device, a lawyer who works in a cemetery, or a stray dog with a scar on his nose. And as for the others, the parasites who share your last name but not your honor, I smile into the twilight. Sometimes, to protect your home, to truly save the sanctuary you have built, you cannot just lock the door. You have to be willing to burn it down to kill the rats inside. And once the smoke clears, you rebuild. stronger, safer, and entirely unapologetically yours. I drain the glass. The audit is closed. The books are finally balanced. And I am home. The hardest lesson wasn't about money or law. It was about the nature of love. We often think unconditional love means accepting abuse, but that is a lie that destroys us. Real love requires respect, and family isn't a biological right. It's a title earned through loyalty. I spent 40 years catching strangers stealing millions, yet I missed the thieves sitting at my own dinner table because I refused to look. Don't make my mistake. Trust your gut, even when it points to the people you raised. Sometimes the only way to save your future is to ruthlessly amputate your past. If you believe justice was served today, hit that like button and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, would you have forgiven your son, or would you have pressed the button just like I did?